My name is Dr. Alexandra Turner. I'm 29 years old, and I just experienced the most humiliating moment of my academic career when my parents stood up during my PhD graduation ceremony in front of 500 distinguished faculty members and announced they were giving my $775,000 National Science Foundation research grant to my college dropout brother Jake, because he needs it more for his business than another boring science project. What my family didn't know was that their public theft of taxpayer-funded research money was about to trigger the most devastating federal investigation in grant fraud history, one that would cost them far more than they could have ever imagined, while restoring justice to the scientific advancement they had so callously destroyed. The moment I walked across that stage at Stanford University to receive my PhD in biomedical engineering, I should have felt nothing but pride and accomplishment after 6 grueling years of research that had pushed the boundaries of cancer treatment technology. My dissertation on targeted drug delivery systems using magnetically guided nanoparticles represented breakthrough work that could revolutionize how we treat aggressive cancers, potentially saving thousands of lives through precision medicine that delivered chemotherapy drugs directly to tumor sites while minimizing damage to healthy tissue. The National Science Foundation had awarded me a $775,000 research grant specifically to continue developing this technology into clinical applications, recognizing that my work represented exactly the kind of innovative medical research that could transform healthcare outcomes for cancer patients worldwide. This wasn't just funding for academic research. It was an investment in life-saving technology that had already shown promising results in laboratory trials. My research team had spent 18 months developing magnetic nanoparticles that could be programmed to target specific cancer cells, carrying chemotherapy drugs directly to tumors while leaving healthy cells unaffected. The preliminary results had been extraordinary, showing 85% tumor reduction in laboratory models, with virtually no side effects compared to traditional chemotherapy's devastating impact on patients' overall health. The grant money would fund the next crucial phase of development, allowing us to refine the targeting mechanisms, conduct expanded trials, and work toward FDA approval for human clinical testing. We were potentially just 2 years away from having a treatment that could save lives while eliminating the horrific side effects that make cancer treatment almost as devastating as the disease itself. Standing in that auditorium filled with Nobel laureates, department heads, and internationally recognized researchers, I felt the weight of responsibility that came with being entrusted with such important work and substantial funding. The National Science Foundation doesn't award $750,000 grants lightly. They had evaluated my research against thousands of other proposals and determined that my cancer treatment technology deserved priority funding because of its potential to benefit humanity. My parents, Linda and Frank Turner, were sitting in the family section, along with my younger brother Jake, who at 25 had dropped out of college 3 years earlier and had been bouncing between various get-rich-quick schemes ever since. I had invited them to share in my achievement, hoping that maybe they would finally understand the significance of what I had accomplished and the importance of the work I was doing. Throughout my academic career, my family had never really understood or valued my dedication to scientific research. While my professors and colleagues recognized my potential and supported my work, my parents consistently treated my achievements as less important than Jake's latest entrepreneurial fantasy, no matter how unrealistic or short-lived his ventures proved to be. Jake had started and abandoned a food truck business after 3 months, launched a failed social media marketing company that generated no clients, attempted to become a day trader with disastrous results, and most recently had been exploring cryptocurrency investments with money he borrowed from our parents. None of his ventures had ever produced sustainable income, but my parents continued to fund his dreams while treating my scientific breakthroughs as impractical academic exercises. The contrast between Jake's record of failure and my record of achievement should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. I had earned my bachelor's degree summa cum laude, completed my master's with distinction, published 12 peer-reviewed papers in prestigious journals, presented my research at international conferences, and now earned my PhD with a dissertation that experts in the field were calling groundbreaking. But my parents had always operated under the assumption that Jake needed more support because he was creative and entrepreneurial, while I was naturally smart and would figure things out without assistance. They saw my academic success as evidence that I didn't need help, while treating Jake's failures as proof that he deserved more investment and encouragement. During my undergraduate years, when I had struggled to afford textbooks and research materials, My parents told me to apply for student loans while simultaneously funding Jake's expensive computer equipment for his various failed online businesses. When I needed a reliable car to commute to my graduate research laboratory, they suggested I buy used while helping Jake purchase a brand new truck for his food delivery venture that lasted less than 4 months. The pattern had been consistent for years. My achievements were taken for granted while Jake's failures were treated as learning experiences that deserved continued financial support. I had learned to expect nothing from my parents, and to fund my own education and research through scholarships, grants, teaching assistantships, and careful financial planning. But I had assumed that my PhD graduation would be different. This wasn't just another academic milestone. It was the culmination of work that could literally save lives and advance medical science in ways that would benefit countless patients. I thought that even my parents would recognize the significance of receiving a nearly $1 million federal grant to continue research that had already shown such promising results. The graduation ceremony proceeded beautifully through the first hour, with distinguished speakers discussing the importance of scientific research and the responsibility that comes with advanced degrees in fields that serve humanity. My research advisor, Dr. Patricia Morrison, had given a moving speech about the potential impact of the work being done by the graduating doctoral students, specifically mentioning my cancer treatment research as an example of how innovative science could transform medical practice. When the family recognition segment began, I watched proudly as other families stood to acknowledge their graduating students' achievements. Parents spoke about their pride in their children's dedication, their admiration for the important work they were doing, and their excitement about the positive impact these new doctors would have on their fields and society. I assumed my parents would follow this pattern, perhaps acknowledging the long hours I had spent in the laboratory, the significance of my research findings, or their pride in seeing me receive federal funding to continue work that could help cancer patients. I had even prepared myself emotionally to hear them express some version of appreciation for the path I had chosen and the achievements I had earned. But when Frank Turner took the podium, his expression wasn't one of pride or celebration. Instead, he looked uncomfortable and defensive, as if he was preparing to make an announcement that he knew would be controversial. The auditorium fell quiet as faculty and students waited to hear what the father of one of their most promising graduates had to say. "Thank you for this opportunity to speak about our daughter Alexandra," Frank began, his voice carrying an odd tension that immediately made me nervous. "Alexandra has always been very focused on her studies, sometimes to the exclusion of other important considerations. Today, we want to announce a family decision that we believe will benefit everyone involved." The phrase "family decision" filled me with dread, because I had no idea what decision he was referring to, and the fact that it was being announced publicly at my graduation ceremony suggested it was something significant that I should have been consulted about, but apparently hadn't been. "We've decided to redirect Alexandra's research money to her brother Jake, who needs it more to start his business," Frank continued, his voice becoming more confident as he delivered what he clearly thought was good news. "Jake has been working hard on innovative business concepts, and he deserves a real opportunity more than another boring science project that probably won't help anyone anyway. Have you ever had a moment when your entire world shifted so dramatically that you couldn't initially process what was happening? That's exactly what I experienced as my father announced to an auditorium full of distinguished scientists that my family was stealing federal research funding to give to my dropout brother for his latest entrepreneurial fantasy. The silence that followed Frank's announcement was unlike anything I had ever experienced. 500 of the most accomplished researchers, professors, and academic administrators in the country sat in stunned disbelief as they tried to understand what they had just heard. My father had just announced the theft of federal research funding as if it were a reasonable family financial decision, rather than a serious federal crime. My research advisor, Dr. Patricia Morrison, looked horrified, clearly understanding both the legal implications of what Frank had announced and the devastating impact this would have on my groundbreaking cancer research. My fellow PhD graduates were exchanging uncomfortable glances, unable to believe that someone's family would sabotage life-saving medical research for personal financial gain. But Frank wasn't finished with his public humiliation of my life's work. "Alexandra will be fine with her fancy degree," he continued, gesturing dismissively toward me as if my 6 years of rigorous doctoral research were a hobby that I could easily replace. "She can always get a job at some company or university, but Jake needs actual financial support to build something practical that people can understand and use." The characterization of my breakthrough cancer treatment research as impractical compared to Jake's history of failed business ventures was so backwards that several faculty members were visibly shaking their heads in disbelief. These were people who understood the difference between legitimate scientific innovation and entrepreneurial fantasy, and they were witnessing a family that had completely inverted those priorities. Linda Turner then stood to join her husband at the podium, apparently feeling that Frank's announcement needed additional explanation or justification. "We know some people might think this decision is unusual," she said, her voice becoming defensive as she sensed the negative reaction from the academic audience. "But we believe in supporting family members who need help the most. Alexandra has always been self-sufficient and successful in school, but Jake needs encouragement and investment to reach his potential." The suggestion that stealing federal research funding was supporting family members who need help revealed how completely my parents misunderstood both the legal nature of research grants and the social impact of the work they were destroying. They were treating taxpayer money designated for cancer research as if it were a family inheritance that they could redistribute based on their personal preferences about which child deserved more support. But the most humiliating moment came when Jake himself stood up and walked toward the front of the auditorium, clearly intending to shake hands with university officials and accept congratulations for receiving research funding that had never been intended for him. His confident smile and casual demeanor showed that he saw nothing inappropriate about accepting nearly $1 million in stolen research money. Jake approached Dr. Morrison and extended his hand, apparently expecting her to congratulate him on his good fortune. "Thank you for all the work you've done with Alexandra," he said loud enough for nearby attendees to hear. "I promise I'll put this money to good use for something that actually matters to regular people, not just academics who write papers nobody reads." The insult to Dr. Morrison, who had dedicated her career to developing medical technologies that saved lives, was breathtaking in its ignorance and arrogance. Jake was dismissing life-saving cancer research as irrelevant academic work, while positioning his failed entrepreneurial ventures as more socially valuable than scientific innovation. Dr. Morrison's response was professionally devastated, but personally furious. "Mr. Turner," she said in the controlled tone she used when dealing with serious problems, "I think there may be some confusion about how federal research grants work. This funding cannot be redirected to non-academic purposes, and what your parents have announced would constitute federal grant fraud if attempted." The mention of federal grant fraud caused visible panic among my family members, who clearly hadn't considered that research funding came with legal restrictions and oversight requirements. They had apparently assumed that once the grant was awarded, the money could be used for any purpose they chose, completely ignoring the federal regulations that governed how taxpayer research funding could be legally spent. "Grant fraud?" Frank asked, his confident demeanor immediately replaced by confusion and concern. "What do you mean? This is family money that Alexandra received for her school project. We can decide how family money should be used." Dr. Morrison's educational response was delivered in a voice that carried clearly throughout the silent auditorium. "Mr. Turner, this is not family money. This is federal research funding provided by taxpayers to support specific scientific research that could save cancer patients' lives. Diverting this money to non-research purposes would be a serious federal crime carrying significant prison sentences." The reaction from the academic audience was immediate and visceral. Researchers who had spent decades competing for federal funding were appalled by my family's casual attitude toward misappropriating taxpayer money designated for life-saving medical research. These were people who understood both the rigorous oversight that governed research grants and the social responsibility that came with being entrusted with public funding for scientific advancement. But my family's response to learning about the legal problems with their announcement was not to apologize and reconsider their decision. It was to become more defensive and hostile about what they saw as academic bureaucracy interfering with their family financial planning. "This is ridiculous," Linda said, her voice rising with indignation rather than embarrassment. "Alexandra is our daughter, and if she received money for her work, then we should have some say in how that money is used. Jake has real business plans that could create jobs and help the economy, not just more research that sits in laboratories." The fundamental misunderstanding of how scientific research benefits society was shocking, coming from people who were witnessing their daughter receive recognition for work that could revolutionize cancer treatment. They were treating breakthrough medical research as selfish academic indulgence, while treating Jake's failed ventures as economically valuable contributions to society. The graduation ceremony continued, but the festive atmosphere had been completely destroyed by my family's public announcement of their intention to commit federal grant fraud. What should have been the proudest moment of my academic career had become a humiliating demonstration of my family's ignorance about scientific research and their willingness to steal taxpayer funding to support Jake's latest entrepreneurial fantasy. As the ceremony concluded and faculty members approached me with expressions of concern and disbelief, I realized that my family's betrayal was about more than just money. It was about their complete dismissal of work that could save lives and their preference for supporting failure over celebrating achievement. But what they didn't understand was that their public announcement of grant fraud had been witnessed by hundreds of people who understood exactly what federal crime they had just confessed to committing. The emotional devastation of my family's betrayal during my PhD graduation was nothing compared to the professional humiliation of watching my groundbreaking cancer research grind to a halt as my parents and Jake began systematically destroying 6 years of scientific work by spending federal research money on luxury purchases and failed business ventures that had no connection to medical research or public benefit. My family's fundamental misunderstanding of scientific research and federal grant regulations became apparent within days of their graduation ceremony announcement, as they began treating the $775,000 National Science Foundation Award as personal income that could be spent on whatever Jake decided would advance his entrepreneurial ambitions. They had no comprehension that research grants came with detailed spending requirements, federal oversight, and legal restrictions that made their theft a serious federal crime. The history of my dedication to cancer research had begun during my undergraduate years, when I had volunteered at a pediatric oncology unit and witnessed firsthand the devastating effects that traditional chemotherapy had on young patients. I watched children as young as 6 years old endure months of treatment that was almost as destructive as their cancer, losing their hair, suffering constant nausea, and experiencing pain that no child should ever have to endure. That experience had driven me to focus my academic career on developing targeted therapies that could deliver treatment directly to cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue unaffected. My master's thesis had explored magnetic guidance systems for drug delivery, and my doctoral research had advanced those concepts into a comprehensive system that used programmable nanoparticles to carry chemotherapy drugs precisely to tumor sites. The breakthrough that had earned me the NSF grant was the development of nanoparticles that could be controlled externally using magnetic fields, allowing doctors to guide treatment directly to cancer sites with unprecedented precision. Laboratory trials had shown that this targeted approach could achieve the same tumor reduction as traditional chemotherapy, while eliminating 90% of the side effects that made cancer treatment so traumatic for patients. This wasn't just academic research. It was the foundation for medical technology that could transform how we treat cancer and potentially save thousands of lives, while dramatically improving quality of life for patients undergoing treatment. The NSF grant was specifically designed to fund the next phase of development, which would involve refining the targeting systems and preparing for clinical trials that could lead to FDA approval within 3 to 5 years. My research team included 12 graduate students, 2 postdoctoral researchers, and 3 technical specialists who had been working together for over 2 years to develop and test the magnetic guidance systems. We had published 4 papers in high-impact journals, presented our findings at international conferences, and attracted attention from pharmaceutical companies interested in licensing our technology for commercial development. The laboratory space we occupied at Stanford represented a $2 million investment in specialized equipment for nanoparticle synthesis, magnetic field generation, and biological testing that couldn't be easily replicated or replaced. Our work required precise conditions and expensive materials that made every day of research valuable, and every interruption costly in terms of both time and scientific progress. But within a week of my graduation, Jake had convinced my parents to release $200,000 from the research grant for what he described as initial business development expenses that would allow him to explore cryptocurrency mining while the family researched other investment opportunities for the remaining funding. The casual way they discussed spending taxpayer money designated for cancer research was breathtaking in its ignorance and callousness. Jake's first purchase with my stolen research funding was a $75,000 luxury BMW that he claimed was necessary for business development and creating a professional image for his cryptocurrency venture. The idea that cancer research money should be used to buy expensive cars was so absurd that I initially thought he was joking, But his social media posts showing off his new vehicle made it clear that he was serious about treating federal research funding as personal spending money. His second major expenditure was $125,000 worth of cryptocurrency mining equipment that he installed in our parents' basement, transforming their home into a high-energy operation that consumed enormous amounts of electricity while producing minimal returns. The sophisticated computers and cooling systems he purchased were impressive from a technology standpoint, but they had absolutely no connection to medical research or any legitimate use of federal grant money. When I confronted my parents about Jake's obvious misuse of research funding, their response revealed how completely they had convinced themselves that their theft was not only legal, but morally justified based on their assessment of family needs and priorities. "Alexandra, you need to stop being so selfish about this money," Linda said when I called to express my horror at Jake's luxury purchases. "Jake is finally taking his business seriously, and he needs proper equipment and transportation to compete in today's economy. Your research can wait until he gets established and starts generating income." The characterization of life-saving medical research as something that could wait while Jake pursued cryptocurrency speculation was morally repugnant, but it was also legally catastrophic. Every day that research funding was diverted from legitimate scientific work to personal expenditures was another day of federal crime that would increase the eventual penalties my family would face. "Mom, that's not Jake's money," I explained, trying once again to help them understand the legal reality of their situation. "That's federal research funding with specific legal requirements about how it can be used. Jake buying luxury cars and mining equipment is federal grant fraud, and you could all go to prison for this." Frank's response was even more dismissive of both the legal requirements and the scientific importance of the work they were destroying. "Alexandra, you're being dramatic about bureaucratic paperwork," he said, his tone suggesting that federal grant regulations were minor inconveniences rather than serious legal requirements. "Jake is building something real that will create value and jobs, not just more academic papers that nobody reads or cares about." The comparison between Jake's failed cryptocurrency speculation and breakthrough cancer research was so backwards that it revealed how little my family understood about either scientific innovation or economic value creation. They were treating taxpayer-funded medical research as worthless, while treating gambling on digital currencies as economically productive activity. But the most devastating aspect of their theft wasn't the money itself. It was the immediate impact on my research team and the cancer treatment development that we were forced to halt. Within 2 weeks of my graduation, we had to stop ordering specialized materials, cancel planned experiments, and begin discussing how to wind down research activities that had been making steady progress toward clinical applications. Dr. Patricia Morrison called an emergency meeting with our entire research team to explain the situation and discuss how we might preserve our work despite the loss of funding. The expression on her face as she explained that my family had stolen our research money was one of professional devastation, mixed with personal outrage at the betrayal of scientific progress. "I need to inform all of you that the Turner family has announced their intention to divert Alexandra's NSF grant funding to non-research purposes," Dr. Morrison told our assembled team. "We are working with University Legal Counsel and federal authorities to address this situation, but in the meantime, we must suspend all research activities that depend on that funding." The reaction from my research teammates was immediate and emotional. These were dedicated scientists who had invested months or years of their lives in developing technology that could save cancer patients, and they were watching their work collapse because of my family's greed and ignorance about the value of medical research. Sarah Chen, a postdoctoral researcher who had been working on the nanoparticle targeting systems, was visibly upset as she realized that her work toward an academic career was being destroyed by people who saw no value in scientific advancement. "Dr. Turner, how can your family not understand that this research could save lives?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief and frustration. Michael Rodriguez, a graduate student who had been developing the magnetic guidance protocols, was angry about the time and effort that would be wasted if our research couldn't continue. "I've spent 2 years on this project," he said, "and we were so close to having something that could actually help patients. How can anyone think cryptocurrency mining is more important than cancer treatment? Have you ever watched your life's work being destroyed by people who claim to love you, but couldn't understand or value what you had dedicated your career to building?" That's exactly what I experienced as my research team discussed how to preserve our scientific progress, while my family continued spending federal research money on Jake's latest entrepreneurial fantasies. The halt in our research activities wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a tragedy for the cancer patients who might have benefited from our targeted treatment technology. Every day of delay meant more patients would endure traditional chemotherapy's devastating side effects, and some patients who might have been saved by our precision approach would suffer or die while we waited for funding to resume our work. But as I worked with university administrators and federal oversight officials to document my family's grant fraud, I began to understand that their public announcement of their crimes had actually created an opportunity for swift justice and comprehensive accountability that would ultimately protect not just my research, but also the broader integrity of the federal funding system that supported life-saving scientific innovation. What my family didn't realize was that their theft of taxpayer money for medical research had been witnessed by hundreds of people who understood exactly what federal crimes they had committed, and that the legal consequences for grant fraud were far more serious than anything they had imagined when they decided that Jake's failed ventures were more important than cancer treatment research. While my family continued to treat the theft of federal research funding as a reasonable family financial decision, I was working with university legal counsel, federal grant oversight officials, and criminal investigators who understood both the severity of grant fraud and the importance of protecting taxpayer-funded scientific research from exactly this kind of misappropriation and abuse. The legal framework governing federal research grants exists specifically to prevent the kind of theft that my family had so casually announced during my graduation ceremony. The National Science Foundation, like all federal agencies that fund scientific research, maintains strict oversight requirements and criminal penalties designed to ensure that taxpayer money intended for public benefit cannot be diverted to personal use or private gain. My first meeting with Stanford's Office of Research Compliance took place 3 days after my graduation, when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the university's director of federal grant compliance, contacted me to discuss what she diplomatically called the unusual situation that arose during your graduation ceremony. Dr. Walsh had been present during Frank's announcement and had immediately recognized the legal implications of what she had heard. Dr. Turner, Walsh began, I need you to understand that what your family announced constitutes serious violations of federal grant law that could result in criminal prosecution for everyone involved. The university has a legal obligation to report suspected grant fraud to federal authorities, and we need to work together to protect both your research and your family from the full consequences of their actions. The meeting was both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it meant the university was taking the situation seriously and would work to protect my research from further damage. Terrifying because it confirmed that my family had committed federal crimes that could result in prison sentences and financial penalties that would destroy their lives. Dr. Walsh explained that federal research grants are governed by detailed regulations that specify exactly how funding can be used, who can authorize expenditures, and what documentation is required for every transaction. The grant agreement I had signed with the NSF was a legal contract that created binding obligations and criminal penalties for violations. Your NSF grant contains specific language stating that funds can only be used for direct research costs, approved personnel salaries, and legitimate research expenses, Dr. Walsh explained as we reviewed my grant documentation. Any diversion of funds to non-research purposes constitutes federal grant fraud under Title 18 of the U.S. Criminal Code, with penalties ranging from 5 to 20 years in federal prison. The severity of the potential penalties was shocking, but it also reflected how seriously the federal government treats the misappropriation of taxpayer money intended for scientific research that benefits public health and safety. Grant fraud wasn't just theft. It was theft that undermined public trust in scientific institutions and diverted resources from research that could save lives. Working with Dr. Walsh, I also met with Agent Patricia Santos from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, who specialized in investigating federal grant fraud and research misconduct. Agent Santos explained that the FBI maintained a dedicated unit for investigating crimes against scientific research because of the critical importance of protecting federally funded innovation from fraud and misappropriation. Dr. Turner, Agent Santos said during our initial interview, what your family has announced and begun to implement represents one of the most blatant cases of grant fraud we've encountered. The public nature of their announcement, combined with their immediate misuse of funds for luxury purchases, creates an unusually clear case for federal prosecution. Agent Santos had already begun investigating my family's financial activities, tracking the movement of grant money from the university's research accounts to personal expenditures that violated every federal regulation governing research funding. Jake's BMW purchase and cryptocurrency mining equipment had created a clear trail of evidence showing deliberate misappropriation of taxpayer money. We have bank records showing that $200,000 in federal research funds were transferred to personal accounts and used for vehicle purchases and speculative investments, Agent Santos continued. This level of documentation makes prosecution straightforward, but we want to ensure that your research can continue while we pursue criminal charges against the perpetrators. The investigation also revealed that my parents had been researching how to access and redirect the full grant amount, treating the NSF award as if it were a family inheritance that they could distribute according to their personal preferences rather than federal law. They had contacted financial advisors about investment opportunities for nearly $750,000 without understanding that the money was designated for specific research purposes. But the federal investigation wasn't just focused on recovering stolen money. It was also designed to send a clear message to anyone who might consider defrauding research programs that fund life-saving scientific work. The Justice Department had made prosecuting grant fraud a priority because of the critical importance of maintaining public trust in scientific institutions. Grant fraud cases like this one threaten the entire federal research enterprise, explained Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Davidson, who would be prosecuting my family's case. When taxpayers fund scientific research, they expect that money to advance knowledge and improve lives, not to be stolen for personal enrichment. We prosecute these cases aggressively to protect the integrity of scientific funding. The criminal case against my family would proceed regardless of whether the stolen money was recovered, because grant fraud was considered a crime against the public interest, rather than just a financial dispute between family members. The fact that their theft had halted cancer research that could save lives made their crime particularly egregious from a prosecutorial standpoint. Working with the federal investigators, I also learned that my family's case would likely result in additional charges beyond simple grant fraud. The systematic nature of their theft, combined with their attempts to legitimize their actions through false business plans and fraudulent documentation, suggested conspiracy charges that carried even more severe penalties. Your parents and brother didn't just steal research money, Agent Santos explained as the investigation progressed. They created a fraudulent scheme to justify their theft, established false businesses to launder the stolen funds, and attempted to destroy evidence when they realized they were under investigation. These actions support additional charges that could result in sentences of 20 to 30 years. The comprehensive nature of the federal response was both gratifying and overwhelming. While I was relieved that the theft of my research funding was being taken seriously by law enforcement, I was also struggling with the reality that my family's greed and ignorance had put them in legal jeopardy that could destroy their lives. But as I worked with investigators to document the full scope of my family's crimes, I also began to understand that their prosecution would serve a larger purpose beyond just recovering stolen money or delivering personal justice. Their case would establish important precedents for protecting federally funded scientific research and demonstrate that stealing taxpayer money intended for life-saving innovation carries serious consequences that extend far beyond family embarrassment. Have you ever been in a situation where pursuing justice for crimes committed against you would also protect countless other people from similar victimization? That's exactly what I experienced, as the federal investigation expanded beyond my personal case to address broader issues of research security and public trust in scientific institutions. The legal processes that would ultimately deliver justice were complex and comprehensive, but they were also designed to ensure that my groundbreaking cancer research could resume while my family faced appropriate consequences for their theft of taxpayer money intended to save lives and advance medical science. The federal investigation into my family's grant fraud accelerated rapidly as Agent Santos and her team documented the systematic nature of their theft and the comprehensive lies they had told to justify stealing taxpayer money designated for life-saving cancer research. But the most damaging evidence came from my family's own actions and statements, as they continued to spend federal research funding while publicly defending their right to redirect scientific grants to personal ventures. The criminal case was strengthened by my family's complete lack of remorse or understanding about the seriousness of their crimes. Rather than acknowledging their mistakes and attempting to return the stolen funding, they doubled down on their justification for treating research grants as family income, while dismissing the importance of cancer treatment development. Jake had used social media to document his luxury purchases and failed business ventures, creating a digital trail that provided federal investigators with comprehensive evidence of grant fraud in progress. His Instagram posts showed him driving his BMW with captions like, "Success starts with looking successful, thanks to family support for my entrepreneurial journey," and photographs of his cryptocurrency mining operation with descriptions of his innovative investment strategies. The social media evidence was particularly damaging because it showed Jake's awareness that he was using family support rather than his own earnings, while simultaneously treating the federal research money as if it were a gift rather than stolen property. His posts created a timeline of grant fraud that would be impossible to deny or explain away during prosecution. My parents had also created evidence of their crimes through their communications with financial advisors and business consultants about how to maximize returns on nearly $750,000 that they described as family money available for investment. These consultations revealed their systematic approach to stealing research funding rather than treating their actions as impulsive family financial decisions. But the most incriminating evidence came from recorded conversations that federal investigators had obtained through wiretaps authorized after demonstrating probable cause for ongoing financial crimes. In these recordings, my family openly discussed their plans for spending my research grant while expressing contempt for the scientific work they were destroying. "Alexandra thinks she's so smart with her fancy degree and her complicated research," Linda had said during one recorded call with Frank. "But Jake has real business sense, and he knows how to make money work for the family, instead of just sitting in some laboratory doing experiments that probably won't help anyone anyway." The casual dismissal of breakthrough cancer research as experiments that probably won't help anyone was morally offensive, but it was also legally significant because it demonstrated that my parents understood they were stealing funding from important medical research while choosing to prioritize their personal preferences over public benefit. Frank's recorded statements were equally damaging to their potential defense. The government gives out millions of dollars for research that never amounts to anything practical. At least when Jake uses this money, we'll see real results that create jobs and economic value instead of just more academic papers that nobody reads. The fundamental misunderstanding of how scientific research creates economic and social value was breathtaking, but it also proved that my parents had deliberately chosen to steal taxpayer money because they disagreed with how it was being used, rather than because they were facing any kind of financial emergency that might justify their crimes. The federal investigation also revealed that my family had attempted to recruit other relatives and family friends to participate in their grant fraud scheme by suggesting that federal research funding was essentially free money that could be redirected to private business ventures without legal consequences. These recruitment efforts constituted additional conspiracy charges that would increase their potential sentences significantly. My uncle Robert Turner had been approached by my parents about investing in Jake's cryptocurrency operation using Alexandra's research money as seed capital for a larger mining operation that could generate income for multiple family members. The attempt to expand their fraud into a family enterprise demonstrated the systematic nature of their criminal thinking. Frank told me that Alexandra had received almost $1 million for some research project that would just sit in accounts anyway. Uncle Robert testified to federal investigators. He suggested that Jake could put the money to better use and maybe cut other family members in on the profits. I told him that sounded illegal, but he insisted that research grants were just government money that could be used however families wanted. The witness testimony from family members who had been approached about participating in the fraud scheme provided additional evidence of conspiracy and criminal intent that would make conviction virtually certain if the case proceeded to trial. But the most dramatic evidence of my family's crimes came from their reaction when they learned that their activities were under federal investigation. Rather than cooperating with authorities or attempting to return stolen funds, they became hostile and defensive while continuing to spend research money on luxury purchases and failed investments. Jake's response to learning about the FBI investigation was to accelerate his spending of stolen research funds, apparently believing that quickly converting the money into personal assets would somehow protect him from prosecution. He purchased expensive jewelry, designer clothing, and electronic equipment while posting social media content about living his best life, despite haters trying to bring him down. My parents' reaction was to hire criminal defense attorneys while simultaneously continuing to defend their theft as reasonable family financial planning. Their initial consultation with legal counsel was recorded because their phones were already under federal surveillance, providing investigators with evidence of their awareness of criminal liability while choosing to continue their fraudulent activities. "We need to make sure Jake gets to keep what he's already bought," Frank had told their attorney during their recorded consultation. Alexandra is trying to destroy her brother's future because she's jealous of his success, and we need to protect him from these ridiculous federal charges." The recorded statement showed that even after learning they were under criminal investigation for federal grant fraud, my parents were more concerned with protecting Jake's stolen assets than with acknowledging their crimes or protecting the cancer research they had destroyed. But the federal investigators had been building a comprehensive case that would ensure my family faced appropriate consequences for their theft, while also recovering funds that could allow my research to resume. The timing of their arrests had been carefully coordinated to maximize both the educational impact and the likelihood of successful prosecution. Agent Santos had worked with Assistant U.S. Attorney Davidson to schedule the arrests during Jake's business success celebration party, an event he had organized to celebrate what he called his financial breakthrough and his family's smart investment in his entrepreneurial ventures. The party was being held at an upscale venue with approximately 100 guests who had been invited to celebrate Jake's business achievements. The irony of arresting my family for grant fraud during their celebration of spending stolen research money was both satisfying and educational. The guests who had been invited to admire Jake's success would witness the federal consequences of stealing taxpayer money designated for cancer treatment research. "We want to execute the arrests when your family is publicly celebrating their crimes," Agent Santos explained as we finalized the timing. "This sends a clear message about the seriousness of grant fraud, while ensuring that the community understands that these aren't victimless financial crimes. They're attacks on scientific research that could save lives. Have you ever known that justice was coming for people who had betrayed you while they continued celebrating their crimes in public? That's exactly what I experienced as federal agents prepared to arrest my family during their party celebrating the theft of cancer research funding. The party that was supposed to celebrate Jake's entrepreneurial success was about to become a demonstration of federal law enforcement's commitment to protecting scientific research from fraud and ensuring that those who steal taxpayer money face appropriate criminal consequences. The federal arrests that took place during Jake's business success celebration party unfolded with a precision and dramatic impact that permanently transformed both my family's understanding of their crimes and the broader community's awareness of how seriously federal law enforcement treats the theft of taxpayer money designated for life-saving scientific research. Jake's celebration party was held at the Riverside Ballroom, an upscale event venue that he had rented using proceeds from my stolen research grant to create an impressive setting for showcasing his entrepreneurial achievements to approximately 100 guests, including family friends, former classmates, and local business contacts who had been told about his financial breakthrough and innovative investment strategies. The party featured an elaborate display of Jake's purchases funded by federal research money, including his BMW displayed prominently in the venue's entrance area, photographs of his cryptocurrency mining operation, and a presentation about his business success that completely ignored the illegal source of his funding. The event was designed to establish Jake's credibility as a successful entrepreneur while hiding the criminal nature of his activities. I learned about the party details through federal surveillance and social media monitoring that had been tracking my family's activities as part of the ongoing criminal investigation. Agent Santos had coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure that the arrests would be conducted safely and professionally while maximizing the educational impact for witnesses. At 8:45 p.m., just as Jake was beginning his prepared speech about turning family support into business success and proving that entrepreneurial vision creates more value than academic theory, 6 federal agents and 4 local police officers entered the ballroom with arrest warrants and search warrants for all 3 family members. Agent Santos led the federal team, displaying her FBI credentials as she approached the microphone where Jake was addressing the crowd about his innovative approach to cryptocurrency investment and his gratitude for family members who understood the importance of supporting real business opportunities instead of impractical research projects. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Santos announced to the shocked party guests, "I'm Special Agent Santos with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have federal arrest warrants for Jacob Turner, Frank Turner, and Linda Turner in connection with federal grant fraud, conspiracy, and theft of taxpayer money designated for medical research." The formal announcement of federal charges caused immediate chaos among the party guests, who were suddenly witnessing the arrest of people they had been celebrating for their business success and family cooperation. The festive party atmosphere was instantly replaced by confusion and alarm as people realized they were seeing the consequences of federal crimes rather than legitimate entrepreneurial achievement. Jake's response to being handcuffed was exactly what I expected based on his character throughout this crisis. He immediately blamed me for his legal problems while denying any understanding of why using research grants for personal purposes might be illegal. "This is crazy," he shouted as federal agents secured him in custody. "That's family money that Alexandra got for her school project. We have every right to use family money for family business." "Mr. Turner," Agent Santos replied in her professional law enforcement tone, "federal research grants are taxpayer money designated for specific scientific purposes, not family money available for personal use. Your misappropriation of $200,000 in National Science Foundation funding constitutes serious federal crimes that carry mandatory prison sentences. The educational correction of Jake's fundamental misunderstanding about research grant law was delivered clearly enough for all party guests to hear, ensuring that everyone present understood they had been celebrating criminal activity rather than legitimate business success. My parents were arrested simultaneously as they attempted to flee through the venue's back exits, apparently realizing that their public defense of grant fraud had created serious legal jeopardy for their entire family. Frank and Linda Turner were handcuffed and read their rights, while party guests watched in horror as the people they had admired for supporting their son's business dreams were revealed to be federal criminals. Frank Turner and Linda Turner, another federal agent announced, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit grant fraud, money laundering, and theft of federal property valued at over $200,000. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The reading of federal charges that included money laundering and theft of federal property elevated the seriousness of their crimes beyond simple grant fraud, reflecting the systematic nature of their theft and their attempts to legitimize stolen research funding through false business documentation. The party guests were witnessing a comprehensive federal law enforcement operation that demonstrated how seriously the government treats crimes against scientific research funding. The arrests weren't just about recovering stolen money. They were about protecting the integrity of the federal research enterprise that funds life-saving innovation. But the arrests were only the beginning of the federal consequences that would unfold during the party. Other agents were executing search warrants throughout the venue, seizing Jake's BMW, documenting his cryptocurrency mining equipment, and collecting evidence of the systematic fraud that had diverted cancer research funding to luxury purchases and speculative investments. "We have evidence that the defendants systematically misappropriated federal research funding designated for cancer treatment development," Agent Santos announced to the crowd of shocked witnesses. "This investigation demonstrates that crimes against scientific research carry serious federal penalties designed to protect taxpayer investments in life-saving innovation." The search warrant execution revealed the full scope of my family's crimes to the party guests who had been celebrating what they thought was legitimate business success. Jake's BMW was impounded as proceeds from stolen federal funds. His mining equipment was seized as evidence of money laundering, and financial records were collected showing the systematic conversion of research grants into personal assets. The party that was supposed to establish Jake's credibility as a successful entrepreneur had become a public education event about federal grant fraud and its consequences. Guests who had been impressed by his business achievements were learning that everything they had admired was purchased with stolen taxpayer money designated for cancer research. The defendants' crimes didn't just involve theft of money, Agent Santos continued as evidence was being collected. They destroyed important medical research that could have saved cancer patients' lives. Grant fraud attacks the scientific progress that benefits all of humanity, which is why these cases are prosecuted aggressively under federal law. The broader context of how grant fraud harms scientific progress resonated with several party guests who began to understand that they had been celebrating crimes that went far beyond simple theft. They had been admiring the destruction of research that could have helped people suffering from life-threatening illnesses. My Uncle Robert, who had been approached about participating in Jake's expanded cryptocurrency operation, provided additional witness testimony to federal agents during the party. I told Frank that using Alexandra's research money sounded illegal, but he insisted that families could decide how to spend grant money however they wanted. I'm grateful I didn't get involved in this scheme. The witness statements from party guests who had been approached about investing in Jake's operation provided additional evidence of conspiracy and criminal solicitation that would increase the charges and penalties my family faced. But perhaps the most dramatic moment of the evening came when Assistant U.S. Attorney Davidson addressed the assembled guests to explain the federal government's commitment to prosecuting grant fraud and protecting scientific research from criminal misappropriation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Davidson announced, "what you've witnessed tonight demonstrates that federal research grants are not personal income available for family distribution. These funds represent taxpayer investments in scientific innovation that saves lives and advances human knowledge. When people steal research funding, they commit crimes against society's future progress and healing." The educational message about the social importance of scientific research funding resonated with many party guests, who were beginning to understand that grant fraud wasn't just a white-collar crime involving money. It was an attack on medical progress that could affect anyone who might someday need the treatments that research develops. Have you ever watched people realize that what they thought was success was actually criminal activity that harmed society's most important work? That's exactly what happened, as party guests learned that they had been celebrating the destruction of cancer research that could have saved lives. The arrests concluded with my family being transported to federal detention facilities, where they would await arraignment on charges that carried potential sentences of 15 to 25 years in federal prison. The party that was supposed to celebrate their business success had become the scene of their education about federal law enforcement's commitment to protecting scientific research from fraud and theft. The comprehensive federal response to my family's grant fraud sent clear messages both about the consequences of stealing research funding and about the government's commitment to ensuring that taxpayer investments in life-saving science are protected from criminal misappropriation. The months following my family's dramatic arrest for federal grant fraud unfolded with a legal precision and moral clarity that completely vindicated my decision to cooperate with federal investigators rather than accepting my family's theft of cancer research funding that could have saved countless lives. The criminal prosecution proceeded with overwhelming evidence, while the recovery of stolen funds allowed my groundbreaking medical research to resume with even stronger federal support. The criminal trial of Frank, Linda, and Jake Turner became a landmark case in federal grant fraud prosecution, attracting attention from scientific institutions, law enforcement agencies, and policymakers who were interested in strengthening protections for taxpayer-funded research. The evidence was so comprehensive, and the defendants' crimes so clear, that the case proceeded to conviction without requiring a lengthy trial. The defendants' own recorded statements and social media posts provide unambiguous evidence of systematic grant fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering, Prosecutor Michael Davidson explained during his opening statement. They stole taxpayer money designated for cancer research and used it for luxury purchases and speculative investments, while showing complete disregard for the life-saving scientific work they were destroying. The prosecution presented evidence that included bank records, showing the diversion of research funds to personal accounts, social media documentation of luxury purchases funded by stolen grants, recorded conversations where my family discussed their theft while expressing contempt for scientific research, and witness testimony from people they had approached about expanding their fraudulent activities. Jake was convicted on all charges, including receiving stolen federal property, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit grant fraud. His social media posts documenting his luxury lifestyle funded by stolen research money provided irrefutable evidence of his knowledge and intent to commit federal crimes. His sentence included 7 years in federal prison, plus full restitution and asset forfeiture of everything purchased with stolen grant money. My parents were convicted of grant fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and theft of federal property valued at over $200,000. Their recorded statements defending their theft, while dismissing the importance of cancer research, provided clear evidence of criminal intent and consciousness of guilt. Frank received a sentence of 10 years in federal prison, while Linda received 8 years, both plus mandatory restitution and supervised probation that would extend for years after their release. But the criminal convictions were only part of the comprehensive justice delivered through federal prosecution. The asset forfeiture process ensured that everything my family had purchased with stolen research funds was seized and sold, with proceeds returned to the National Science Foundation for redistribution to legitimate scientific research. Jake's BMW was seized and sold at federal auction, along with his cryptocurrency mining equipment, luxury jewelry, and electronic devices purchased with grant money. The total recovery exceeded $180,000, which was returned to my research account along with additional federal funding designed to compensate for the delays caused by their theft. The civil forfeiture proceedings also revealed additional crimes that my family had committed while attempting to hide their theft from federal oversight. They had created false business documents, established fraudulent bank accounts, and attempted to launder stolen research funds through multiple transactions designed to obscure the illegal source of their spending money. The defendants' attempts to legitimize their theft through false business documentation constitute additional federal crimes that justify enhanced sentences. Judge Patricia Williams explained during the sentencing hearing. Grant fraud cases require serious penalties to protect the integrity of scientific research and maintain public trust in federal funding programs. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome of the federal prosecution was the complete restoration of my research program with additional funding that reflected the government's commitment to ensuring that scientific innovation couldn't be derailed by criminal family members who stole taxpayer money designated for life-saving medical development. The National Science Foundation awarded my research team a supplemental grant of $1.2 million to compensate for the delays caused by my family's theft and to accelerate the development of our cancer treatment technology. The additional funding allowed us to expand our research team, purchase advanced equipment, and pursue multiple parallel development tracks that would bring our targeted therapy system to clinical trials more rapidly. Dr. Turner's cancer research represents exactly the kind of innovative science that federal funding is designed to support, NSF Director Dr. Amanda Foster announced during the grant award ceremony. The criminal theft of her original funding was an attack on scientific progress that benefits all humanity. This supplemental award ensures that important medical research can continue despite criminal interference from people who failed to understand its value. The restored and enhanced funding allowed my research team to achieve breakthrough results that exceeded our original expectations. Within 18 months of resuming our work, we had refined our magnetic nanoparticle delivery system to achieve 95% tumor reduction in laboratory trials while eliminating virtually all side effects associated with traditional chemotherapy. Our improved targeting technology attracted attention from pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers who were interested in licensing our innovations for commercial development. 3 major companies entered into partnership agreements that would fund clinical trials, while ensuring that our technology would be developed and distributed to benefit the maximum number of cancer patients worldwide. Dr. Turner's targeted drug delivery system represents a paradigm shift in cancer treatment, said Dr. Michael Chen, Director of Oncology Research at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. This technology could transform cancer therapy from a devastating ordeal into a precise medical intervention that eliminates tumors while preserving patients' quality of life. The clinical trial partnerships also generated additional revenue that allowed me to establish the Turner Foundation for Medical Research Ethics, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting scientific research from fraud, theft, and interference while educating the public about the importance of federally funded innovation in advancing medical science. The Foundation's first initiative was a comprehensive education program about research grant regulations and the criminal penalties for misappropriating taxpayer money designated for scientific purposes. The program used my family's case as an educational example of how grant fraud harms both individual researchers and the broader scientific enterprise that benefits society. The Turner case demonstrates that grant fraud isn't just theft of money. It's theft of scientific progress that could save lives and advance human knowledge, explained the Foundation's educational materials. When people steal research funding, they attack society's investment in its own future health and prosperity. 1. But the most meaningful recognition of my work came when the first patients were successfully treated using our magnetic nanoparticle therapy system during early clinical trials. These patients experienced complete tumor remission with minimal side effects, proving that our research had achieved its goal of transforming cancer treatment from a traumatic ordeal into a precise medical intervention. I can't believe how easy this treatment was compared to traditional chemotherapy, said Margaret Rodriguez, one of our first clinical trial participants. I expected to be sick and exhausted for months, but Dr. Turner's technology eliminated my cancer while allowing me to maintain my normal activities and quality of life. The patient success stories validated everything I had worked toward during 6 years of doctoral research and confirmed that federal investment in scientific innovation produces results that justify public funding and legal protection from criminal interference. 5 years after my family's conviction for federal grant fraud, my cancer treatment technology has been approved by the FDA for clinical use and is now saving lives in hospitals across the country. The research they tried to destroy by stealing taxpayer funding has become a standard treatment that has helped thousands of cancer patients avoid the devastating side effects of traditional chemotherapy while achieving better medical outcomes. Jake is serving his 7-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in Texas, where he will remain until 2029. His attempts to appeal his conviction were denied after federal courts determined that the evidence of his crimes was overwhelming and his sentences were appropriate for the seriousness of grant fraud charges. My parents are serving their sentences at separate federal facilities, with Frank scheduled for release in 2032 and Linda in 2030. Their restitution obligations will continue long after their prison releases, ensuring that they remain financially responsible for their theft of cancer research funding for the rest of their lives. The house they lost through asset forfeiture was sold to help pay restitution, and their retirement savings were seized as proceeds from criminal activity. Their financial futures will be permanently affected by their decision to steal taxpayer money designated for life-saving medical research. But perhaps the most important legacy of their prosecution is the precedent it established for protecting federally funded scientific research from criminal interference. The Turner case is now used in law enforcement training programs and legal education to demonstrate how grant fraud cases should be investigated and prosecuted. The Turner prosecution demonstrates the federal government's commitment to protecting scientific research from criminal misappropriation, said FBI Director Patricia Martinez during a conference on white-collar crime enforcement. When people steal taxpayer money designated for life-saving innovation, they commit crimes against society's future progress and healing. My own career has flourished beyond anything I could have imagined when I was starting my doctoral research. The Turner targeted therapy system is now used in oncology centers worldwide, and my research laboratory has become a leading center for developing precision medical technologies that improve patient outcomes while reducing treatment costs and side effects. The federal funding that my family tried to steal has generated medical innovations worth billions of dollars while saving thousands of lives and improving the quality of life for cancer patients who no longer have to endure the devastating effects of traditional chemotherapy. Every patient who benefits from our targeted therapy system represents a vindication of the federal investment in scientific research and a triumph over the criminal ignorance that tried to destroy life-saving innovation. If you're a researcher whose work has been threatened by family members who don't understand or value scientific innovation, please know that federal law exists to protect taxpayer investments in research that benefits humanity. Grant fraud is a serious crime with serious consequences, and law enforcement agencies are committed to ensuring that scientific progress cannot be derailed by criminal interference. Document any threats to your research funding, work with your institution's compliance officers to report suspicious activities, and don't hesitate to involve federal authorities when family members or others attempt to misappropriate taxpayer money designated for scientific purposes. Your research might save lives, and it deserves protection from anyone who would steal or destroy it for personal gain. Have you ever seen important work threatened by people who couldn't understand its value? How do you protect scientific research and innovation from those who would exploit or destroy it? Your experience might help other researchers who face similar challenges from family members or others who fail to appreciate the importance of federally funded scientific advancement. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that scientific research funded by taxpayers belongs to all humanity, and those who would steal or destroy it commit crimes against society's future progress and healing. Sometimes the greatest revenge against those who attack scientific innovation is ensuring that the research they tried to destroy goes on to save lives and advance human knowledge for generations to come. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.